Ghana says it will evacuate 300 of its citizens from South Africa because of what it calls xenophobic attacks. Several African countries have also lodged diplomatic complaints over the treatment of their nationals in the country. But Pretoria rejects all claims of xenophobia.
Any characterization of this protest that seeks to portray South Africans as xenophobic is actually lazy sort of analysis of the real issues that are at play here.
South Africa is a magnet for most Africans because it's the most developed economy on the continent. Government data shows it's home to more than 3 million immigrants. Most of them, or about 64%, have historically been from the Southern African region. But 1 in 3 South Africans do not have jobs, fueling tension with migrant workers. Between January and March this year, the number of jobless South Africans rose to more than 8 million people. The country also faces the challenge of undocumented immigrants. Since April 2023, the Border Management Authority says it has deported about 500,000 people.
We all have concerns, as many other countries in the world have concerns about undocumented and illegal migrants. We must not allow these concerns to give rise to xenophobia, to give rise to hatred that is directed towards people from other African countries or any parts of the world.
South Africa has had recurring waves of xenophobic attacks, which the UN defines as the hostility, dislike or hatred of people perceived as foreign or outsiders to a community. A 2025 survey by the Human Sciences Research Council shows that South Africans are more hostile towards immigrants than at any other time before research began in 2003. That includes May 2008, when the first deadly, widespread xenophobic attacks on foreigners erupted. UN data showed at least 62 foreign nationals were killed, more than 670 injured, and about 100,000 displaced. More xenophobic attacks in 2015 led to the murder of at least 6 foreign nationals and a further displacement of about 5,000, UN figures show. 4 years later, Nigeria repatriated more than 600 of its citizens after deadly attacks left at least 12 people dead and hundreds of businesses looted or destroyed. Abuja even boycotted that year's World Economic Forum hosted in Cape Town. Between 2021 and 2022, Operation Dudula emerged, which in Zulu means to force out. The group organized protests against undocumented immigrants and accused foreigners of taking jobs from South Africans. Operation Dudula is now a registered political party. And fresh anti-immigrant demonstrations across several cities in South Africa, as well as targeting of foreigners this year, have triggered protests from leaders in Ghana and Nigeria after 2 Nigerian nationals were reportedly killed in xenophobic attacks. Abuja has announced a voluntary repatriation program for its nationals in response.
As a country, we said we are not satisfied with just mere statement. We need actions from the South African government. So fine, they've given us the assurances, but for this time around, we want tangible proofs that you have taken A, B, C, D actions to ensure and guarantee the safety of Nigerians living in South Africa. South Africa has a lot of business interests in Nigeria.
It is clearly unacceptable to generalize, stereotype Nigerians in particular, and then other African nationals in general, of being drug barons, of being kidnappers, of being armed robbers, of being ringleaders. This is absolutely unacceptable. It is stereotyping, and we condemn it with the highest form of condemnation.
Ghana recently announced the immediate evacuation of 300 Ghanaians from South Africa. Accra also wrote a letter to the African Union asking the continental body to debate what it calls xenophobic attacks in the Republic of South Africa against African nationals in its upcoming media summit in June.
The government of Ghana remains deeply concerned by the recurrence of xenophobic incidents in the Republic of South Africa, which have regrettably resulted in the loss of lives, destruction of investment, and continue to pose serious risk to the safety and well-being of many African nationals residing in South Africa.
prompting South Africa to respond.
South Africa finds Ghana's decision to escalate concerns about irregular migration to the African Union regrettable. However, should the AU deem it appropriate to place the matter on the agenda, South Africa will also propose an agenda item on the push and pull factors of migration, including good governance, rule of law, and democracy, in accordance with the Constitutive Act of the AU.
We turn now to Alan Hirsch, the head of the Migration Governance Reform Program at the New South Institute. He joins us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you very much, sir, for making the time for this conversation. I mean, straight up, just what's behind the current wave of attacks on foreigners living in South Africa?
Well, there are a number of factors, I think. Clearly, there is quite a lot of political agitation, and I think some of that agitation is done for reasons which only the leaders of those movements know. But the underlying issue is that South Africa has very high unemployment. The figures came out yesterday: about 33% unemployment. Much of that youth unemployment. There are issues around poverty. About 40% of the population is considered to be below the poverty line. And there are issues around housing and social services. Not all South Africans are well served in terms of housing and social services. Now, the problem of migrants and migration and undocumented migrants is a relatively marginal one. Migrants make up about 4 million of the total population, about 6% of the total population. And the large majority of those people are legal migrants. So migrants aren't really the cause of the problem, but they find themselves at the brunt of the issues, the discontent that South Africans have at the moment about their circumstances. And I think the economy never really recovered after COVID, and people are battling. And unfortunately, I think irresponsible leaders are taking advantage of this discontent.
Right. Let's expound on what you said, because you mentioned three key things: unemployment, poverty, and housing. These protesters say or claim that the foreigners are taking their jobs. Is that the actual reality on the ground? Is that the reason for the high unemployment rate? Part of the reason, I mean.
Well, funny, you divide it into two. It's quite possible that some foreign migrants, especially undocumented migrants, are competing with very poor South Africans for low-skilled jobs. But it's not true that that is the cause of unemployment. We've had high levels of unemployment for decades, from before the transition to democracy. Then in the democratic era, it improved for a while. And then after the global financial crisis, unemployment got worse again. There's no correlation between the level of unemployment and the number of immigrants. But unfortunately, for a few poor people who are living alongside those poor migrants, they see them as competition. So it is possible to mobilize them. On the whole, though, it's no economist would agree with an argument which said that migrants are causing unemployment. In fact, there might even be many migrants are actually creating jobs.
And there's a lot I want us to talk about, but let's just go back to the waves of these xenophobic attacks that we've been seeing happening in the country. Allow me to just read something very short for you. A 2025 survey by the Human Sciences Research Council, which shows that South Africans are more hostile towards immigrants than at any other time before this survey began in 2003. I mean, is this a ticking time bomb? Are we likely to see this erupt like it did in 2008?
Well, it has already erupted in a way that's not very different from 2008. Perhaps the level of violence isn't as high yet, and hopefully it won't be that. Will it erupt? I think that depends on political leadership. It depends on political leaders taking a very firm position, making it clear that it's not migrants that are the cause of the problem, and also trying to find a way to improve strategies for integrating migrants into the community. Another thing that can be done is that the South African government needs to build more trust amongst its people that the Department of Home Affairs and the relevant authorities are making sure that people living in the country are living legally in the country. And I don't think that that level of trust is high enough at the moment. The current leadership of the Department of Home Affairs is trying to improve their systems and trying to improve the integrity of their systems. Recently, the South African passport got an improved rating, and I think that things are moving in the right direction. But political leaders have to make it very clear that this is the cause of their problems is not migration, and that those people who are leading these marches and anti-migrant activities are behaving in an irresponsible way. President Ramaphosa did say in his newsletter this week and also in a speech over the weekend, I think it was, that he was very critical of this anti-foreigner behavior. But more leaders need to speak out from all the political parties.
Right, but then the reality, which you also alluded to earlier, is that we have a challenge. South Africa has a challenge with undocumented migrants. I mean, what more should the government, South Africa and other African governments do to deal with this and to manage it?
Well, there are proposed, there's a white paper on citizenship, immigration and refugee protection, which has just been approved by cabinet, which is proposing a very significant improvement in the systems that manage citizenship, refugees and immigration, including digitization, reducing corruption in the Department of Home Affairs, which has been an issue historically. That's why people, don't trust government, because quite a lot of people have been able to get into the country on false documentation through bribery. Now that is being fixed. It's a question of how quickly it can be fixed. I think that there needs to be a restoration of confidence of people in the government that they are managing undocumented people. By the way, the Department of Labour has committed to increasing the number of labour inspectors, and there's a Department of Labour policy which indicates that it's going to propose quotas for South African citizens on a sectoral basis, so by industry sector, that a minimum percentage of the people employed should be South Africans. I don't think that would be harmful. I think they would do it at a reasonable level, and it might give South Africans more assurance that they are being protected.
Right. As we wind up, sir, I mean, the government insists that the attacks are not xenophobic. In fact, the government spokesperson earlier said that that's a lazy analysis to call these protests and these attacks xenophobic. Do you agree with that? And just how does that affect the protection of foreign nationals?
So it depends how you define xenophobia. If xenophobia is some sort of irrational people because of their origin, their religion, or their race, I think very little of it is actually xenophobic. I don't think most South Africans think, all Nigerians are bad or all Zimbabweans are bad, or, there's something inherent in those people. I think it's much more a question of competition. So some of the older, less educated South Africans, I think, may have xenophobic views. They may be suspicious of foreigners in an irrational way. But I think for most younger, more educated South Africans, and the education system has improved in the last 30 years in South Africa, I think for them, it's much more a question of the government is not giving us enough access to jobs, health services, housing, and so on. And it just happens to be foreigners who are in the way.
Yeah, but sir, my part B of the question was the government insisting the attacks are not xenophobic. Then how does that affect the protection of the foreign nationals?
It doesn't, because, whether you call it xenophobia or anti-foreigner violence, it's the same thing. So it's a semantic issue. It doesn't help. It doesn't help deal with the issue.
Right. Mr. Alan Hirsch, the head of the Migration Governance Reform Program at the New South Institute. Thank you very much, sir, for your time and such valuable contribution.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Still to come here on Africa Matters.
I am Palum David in Abuja with the story of how tensions in the Strait of Hormuz are threatening fertilizer supply, raising food prices and putting pressure on Nigerian farmers during the critical planting season.
To the Democratic Republic of the Congo now, where President Felix Tshisekedi has hinted that he could run for a third term in 2028 if there is a request from his people. But the country has lost two major eastern cities to the M23 rebels, who continue fighting against government forces despite a ceasefire deal. Chris Okamrenga has more about the unfolding constitutional crisis from the capital, Kinshasa.
A debate about changing the DRC's constitution has been raging in the country for months. The members of the ruling party, the Union for Democracy and Social Progress, say they want to amend several articles, including the key Article 220, which limits the presidential service to 2 terms, paving way for President Tshisekedi to run for a third term after his current and final term ends in 2028.
Our constitution has placed our president in a stranglehold, and that has contributed to the war in the east. So we've already started the process of changing it, and we will change it.
Our government has improved economic opportunities for citizens. We now conduct trade that foreigners previously dominated. We were slaves in our own country, but we got Felix Tshisekedi, whom we regard as Moses in the Bible, who came to set us free. We have to support him because he is a man with a mission, not a mandate.
President Tshisekedi recently stated that he has not asked for a third term, but will accept it if the people ask him to run again. He also said that elections may not be held in 2028 if the conflict with the M23 rebels in the east of the country continues. The rebel group is largely composed of ethnic Tutsis who are widely believed to be backed by Rwanda. They say they are fighting to restore good governance and protect their community from a rival Hutu militia supported by the DRC government. Many opposition politicians disagree.
He lied to us, claiming it wouldn't be possible to organise elections if the war in the east continues. But what is that referendum that he's seeking? It's also a voting system. You don't want to organise presidential elections, but are willing to organise elections to determine whether you can have a third term. That clearly shows you're a politician who doesn't care about advancing the country's interests.
Under the current constitution, any amendment has to be voted on in a referendum or be approved by 60% of members of parliament.
The debate about changing the DRC constitution has further divided the country, grappling with the M23 conflict, which has caused a major humanitarian crisis in eastern Congo. Furthermore, the DRC constitution prohibits any amendment of the supreme law when the country is at war or under a state of siege. The ruling party is, however, determined to proceed with its plan. Chris Ochamringa, Africa Matters, Kinshasa.
Well, the impact on the supply and price of oil has been well documented ever since the Strait of Hormuz was effectively closed. But the United Nations warns that if the disruption continues, 45 million more people could face hunger as fertilizer prices rise and planting seasons are affected. For farmers in Nigeria, the fear is already a reality, as Palum David reports from Abuja.
For over 2 decades, Maimuna Doka has sold fertilizer to farmers in Karo community on the outskirts of Abuja. She remembers when a container of fertilizer sold for just 10 naira. That's over a kilogram for 7 US cents. Today, the same weight costs 1,500 naira or $1.10. Many farmers can no longer afford to buy the quantities they need.
Some even intend to buy 10 noodles, but when they see how expensive it has become, a person might only buy 2 or even 3. And then leave because the price is so high. I tell them this is the situation in Nigeria now.
Maimuna's son, Kyota Doka, also relies on fertilizer for his pepper farm. Like many farmers, he says rising prices are making farming increasingly difficult. He fears the situation will only get worse.
We want government to assist us. Let them give us the original fertilizer, the original one, the chemical original one. That's what we have. And the price should go down. Because even if so one day hungry will enter this country, no farmer, no nation. No farmer, no food.
The rising costs are linked to global supply disruptions, especially through the Strait of Hormuz. It is through that choke point, now closed due to the US-Iran war, that 1/3 of seaborne fertilizer normally travels.
The Strait of Hormuz may be thousands of kilometers away from Nigeria, but the impact of disruptions there is already being felt here by local farmers and traders who are worried about rising costs, lower harvests, and even higher food prices in the months ahead.
The UN is now warning that 45 million more people could face hunger and starvation in African and Asian countries if fertilizers are not allowed through the straits. Nigeria's heavy dependence on imported fertilizer and raw materials leaves farmers vulnerable whenever global trade is disrupted.
Government can also improve access to fortified fertilizer or organic fertilizer, so to speak, so we don't depend on these producers for fertilizers. Then I think a strategic reserve can also help in case of maybe global fertilizer shortage. That this will help especially the smallholder farmers to have access to pending the time the market stabilizes. So yeah.
Many Nigerian farmers hope that fertilizer prices stabilize before the planting season progresses further, easing pressure on farmers already struggling with the rising cost of food production. Paulum David, Africa Matters, Abuja.
The Middle East conflict has also spiked freight costs, threatening the livelihoods of farmers who depend on exporting fresh produce to Europe. Rising shipping expenses are now threatening profits in Zimbabwe and putting pressure on small-scale farmers across the continent, especially for those who rely on the European market. Christina Shimich reports.
Inside the Kuminda pack house in northern Harare, selection and packaging of the best fresh sugar snap peas for export to European supermarkets is underway. But for exporters and thousands of small-scale farmers, the future remains uncertain.
Our freight costs this year have gone up by at least $1 a kg. Last year, this time of the year, we were paying around $2.20 a kg. This year we are paying $3.80. Now we're paying $3.80 per kg to export to the EU or UK. So to get products to London or to Amsterdam is more expensive this year.
The surge in transport costs is also making it harder to compete with other producers.
We compete with South American countries. We also compete with countries that are closer to the market in Egypt and Kenya. They have more flight options. They are closer to the market. Their freight costs are not nearly what we are paying at the moment. So it does affect us.
Zimbabwe is one of the major suppliers of sugar snap peas to Europe, particularly the United Kingdom, where exports peak between April and October during the local off-season. Zimbabwe's horticulture sector has been growing steadily according to the trade promotion agency Zimtrade. Last year, it exported different fresh produce, including blueberries, worth $181 million. But the UN is warning that millions of people could face hunger and starvation if fertilizers are not allowed through the Strait of Hormuz.
On average, we would need 5 vessels a day of fertilizers and related raw material, ammonia, sulfur, and urea, to go through the strait and to reach those that are in need of those fertilizers to produce their agriculture foodstuff.
Sudan, Somalia, South Sudan, Kenya and Mozambique are among African countries that depend on fertilizers from the strait. And as the supply chain that connects thousands of Zimbabwean farmers and exporters to dinner tables in Europe remains threatened, it is their hope that easing global tensions will eventually release the chokehold and bring input and export costs back down. Christina Shimich, Africa Matters.
That's our show this week. Share your thoughts and suggestions about foreigners under fire in South Africa or any other stories you've seen on this episode. You can leave your comments on our Africa Matters YouTube page or on X. Thanks for watching, and it's goodbye from me, Grace Korea Kanja.